brought along the perfect troop to kick the ballistics. Come on.
You and Your Money is brought to you by IRCA, Fidelity, the Free National Movement, Focall, and Polymers.
Liberalization of the telecommunications sector is a reality. Good evening. Welcome to You and Your Money. I'm Carlton Smith. We're so pleased to have in studio this evening Stephen Bureau, who is the CEO of the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority. Stephen, good evening. Welcome to You and Your Money.
Good evening, Carlton. Good evening to your viewers. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's begin so that we can remind our audience of IRCA's mandate. What is the remit of the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority?
IRCA is the regulator for the independent regulator for the electronic communication sector and the electricity sector in the Bahamas, with electricity having been recently added last year. In the electronic communication sector, we are responsible for all telecommunications, broadcasting, radio spectrum, and numbers, everything to do with telecommunications in the country. In the electricity sector, we're responsible for the generation, transmission, distribution, and supply of electricity to consumers. We authorize the providers who operate in the sector, and we seek to ensure that they offer services in the best interest of the consumer and the country as a whole.
You have recently presided over this transition from a single telephone company provider to a multiple cellular telephone provider, and that process introduced competition to the environment. Talk about that process and how smooth that transition was for the regulator to make that a reality.
We've been working on this. Mobile liberalization or cellular liberalization has been our focus for many years. The law provided a monopoly, a legal monopoly to BTC that ended in April 2014. And essentially, since that date, the government started a process to select a new provider. That process would have finished in 2015, late 2015, October, and with Cable Bahamas being the successful operator. And at that point, Cable Bahamas and the government set up what is now Be Alive or Alive. It's 51 or just under 52% owned by the government and 48.25% owned by Cable Bahamas Limited. And Alive, as the new provider, was required to roll out its services by October last year, which they did, albeit they had a soft launch on the 1st of October. They began offering full commercial services on the 23rd of November. And since then, we have been engaged in firstly ensuring, or rather for the whole period we've been engaged in, firstly ensuring that the regulatory framework is there. There are a whole host of rules, regulations, and frameworks that you have to put in place to allow two operators to operate in something as diverse, as fast-paced as a liberalized cellular environment. So we've been engaged in doing that work. And now, part of our role, which is ongoing, is to ensure that Alive rolls out its services across the country as they're required to. And most recently, as we've been pleased to introduce mobile number portability, which is a key enabler for us.
So let's talk about that. Mobile number portability is one of the things that customers have been asking for. I want the option to change my service provider if I so choose, but I don't want to lose the convenience of having the number that I've identified with for many years. How has that process gone? And it's been recently introduced. And so are the two service providers comfortable with this change?
Well, I mean, just to firstly touch on the need for it, obviously, as you mentioned, people, in order for competition to be effective, people need to be able to keep their numbers, because otherwise that's a drag on you. Your number holds you back. It's like something pulling you, trying to get out of the room, something stopping you from going there. So we've now successfully removed that barrier. I will say that the removal of the barrier or introduction of mobile number portability has been a very involved, at times very stressful process, because as a regulator, you have to effectively be arbitrating or between two parties that must work together for it to work. And I'll highlight that in order for mobile number portability to work, BTC and Alive, and in fact, Cable Bahamas and all of the telephone service providers, both fixed and mobile, have to work together on any number of factors that impact their whole business. So you're in a situation where operators are required to say, we're competing fiercely with each other, but we have to cooperate for this thing to work. And the interest in making it work isn't always equal, obviously. One operator may have more incentive than the other. So the process has been difficult, but the operators have cooperated. They've made it a reality. It is not without its hiccups, and hopefully over the next few days, weeks, all of those hiccups will be ironed out, and we'd have a smooth, without difficulty process. But so far, it's been working. It was launched formally on the 27th of April, and we've had a reasonably smooth introduction. People have been able to port their numbers. The guaranteed service time is 2 hours. It's supposed to happen within 2 hours from the time you start the process to say, I want this to happen. We have found in most cases it has been minutes, which is the expected level of service that we're hoping for. Is you go into the store to buy a new service. You say, I want to bring my old number from the other provider, and you walk out of the store with your number working.
So the responsibility is on the new provider, not the old provider, to make this happen. If I'm changing my service from one company to the next, I go to the new company that I'm dealing with.
Absolutely. So the responsibility is on both because they both work together. But fundamentally, what we have is what we call it a recipient-led process. So the recipient, being the service provider you are going to, who is receiving the customer, leads the number portability process. They send the first message, and these messages, the way number portability actually works, each operators install the systems on their respective networks, and they operate or they make it work through a third-party clearinghouse, which handles the communication between the operators and between the world at large, in fact, that makes number portability a reality. So you go into the store where you want to buy the service that you're moving to, and you say, I'd like your whatever plan. I'd like to buy a phone if I want to buy a handset, or otherwise I'd like to take the special offer you have, but I want my old number. I have service with the other provider and I want my old number. So at that point, they make you fill out a form, they send the first message to the clearinghouse. You will have to send a text message to the clearinghouse to tell the clearinghouse that I'm really in a store trying to move my number, because that's really the authorization from the clearinghouse.
Right.
And then the process works from there, back and forth between the operators. You don't see that. All you see is a text message coming back to you and saying, your port has happened, and you should now switch out your SIM cards and use your new service. There's no interruption in service. Up until that text message comes in, your old service works seamlessly, and from the time that text message comes in, your new service works with your old number.
Okay, this is Union Money. We're talking to Stephen Burrow, the CEO of the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority. We'll continue in a moment.
Our economy shrinking, incomes decreasing, unemployment on the rise with 1 in 9 Bahamians out of work, and our country's credit rating falling to junk bond status. Yet the PLP keeps handing out lucrative government contracts to friends, donors, even family members. A stagnant economy, crippling unemployment, credit downgrades, rampant corruption. They can't fix our problems when they keep ignoring them.
Child Shauna, another year older, and I just got a new smartphone and MNP for my birthday.
What's MNP?
MNP stands for Mobile Number Portability, and IRCA, the regulator, says that with MNP, I can keep my existing number anytime I make that change.
Really?
Yes. So that means that the girls won't have to remember a new number for me when I make that change. Thanks, MNP.
MNP, change your service, keep your number.
Since 1967, Focal has been a vital part of the Grand Bahama community, providing high-quality products and great customer service. Today, we continue to work hard and remain focused on fueling growth for people throughout the Bahamas.
Come home to Fidelity Bank for the lowest payments on loans and consolidations ever. Find out how you can get lower interest rates, lower fees, and lower monthly payments. And with 30-day no pay and a built-in savings plan, Fidelity is giving you just what you need to bounce back with money left in your pocket. Plus, free financial coaching with expert advice on how to keep more cash in your wallet. A $500 value free. Take advantage of low rates.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. I'm Carlton Smith. Now, Stephen, you talked about that process. It sounds like a smooth process, maybe a little difficult for some people to grasp, but the key thing is that you go to your new service provider and they begin the process and everything else will flow from there.
Absolutely.
Okay, now,
Absolutely.
Are there any financial arrangements between the companies as it relates to this number portability?
Between the companies, well, firstly, important to note, you don't pay anything as the user. You pay for your service as normal. There's no charge to you as a customer. Between the companies, money doesn't pass between them, but they have gotten together and they do pay on a monthly basis for the service that is provided to make number portability a reality. So the external clearinghouse provider is paid by the operators to provide the clearinghouse services. And obviously the operators will have incurred costs themselves on their networks in order to make it happen. But effectively, they bear the cost of number portability, and you as a consumer, you're entitled to it. As long as you follow the process, it should happen, and it should happen smoothly.
It's intended to be a very smooth process, and the outside window for this transition to take place, you said, is 24 hours.
Well, yeah.
What happens if there is a problem that extends beyond the 24-hour period? What does the customer do?
Well, the initial thing the customer needs to do is complain to the operator you've gone to. You always stay with your new provider from a customer perspective, and that's something we want to stress. We want people to understand that the intent is that when you want to switch, your engagement should always be with your new provider, not your old one. And the reason for that is we don't want the old provider the old provider can do things to make it not happen and to keep the customer. So we want to make sure that the customer engages with the new provider. But if it doesn't go through as it should, you complain. And there is an escalation process between the operators because a port may go through or a port may fail to go through because of either operator. Both operators have the ability, if they want, to make it not happen. Both operators have systems that have to work for it to happen, and they both have to work together to fix any problems. But we want the customer to understand that you talk to your new provider. You shouldn't have to go back to somebody who you've decided to leave for anything.
One of your other responsibilities, as you alluded to at the top of the show, is to regulate the broadcast communication sector. And this is a time of year when people are watching what broadcasters are doing and critiquing what broadcasters are doing. You've developed a code of practice for broadcasters. Let's talk a little about the election season and the code of practice that governs the broadcasters during this period. What do you have in place?
So the IRCA's regulation of the broadcasting sector is primarily centered around the code of practice for broadcast for content regulation. And it's a code, so it is a set of rules, guidelines that all broadcasters are required to comply with. And Part 6 of the code specifically refers to political advertising and the election season. So what it seeks to do is to preserve or present to the public a balanced environment, a broadcasting environment in which political parties can all have their say, and to the electorate, so that the electorate receives, through broadcasters, through the media, an informed framework within which to make a decision. Our democracy is a critical part of our framework of being a country. And it's important from IRCA's perspective that when the state gives the broadcasters the right to broadcast, because they are licensed by us and they receive property of the state, being the spectrum, in order to do that. When the state gives the broadcasters that right, broadcasters have a responsibility to use it in the best interests of the state.
There's this view by the public, by even some broadcasters, some operators, that I have freedom to do whatever I want to do. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and I can do whatever I want to do. Obviously, what you're talking about is the freedom with the responsibility that comes with these different rules.
Yeah. Now, no freedom is absolute. So that's the first thing I would say. You know, every freedom that we have is balanced by somebody else's freedom. So my freedom of expression might be balanced by your freedom not to be defamed. I mean, fundamentally, I have to balance it and limit it in that way. The critical point, as I mentioned, is they have been granted as broadcasters a state asset. Now, even if freedom of expression is, or was, because it isn't actually, the Constitution doesn't actually guarantee freedom of expression, but even if it was guaranteed by the Constitution, that doesn't now also give you the right to freely express yourself over the airwaves, because the airwaves belong to the state separately. And not everyone gets equal access to the state's airwaves. So therefore, you can't say that, well, you know, I have freedom of expression, I can say what I want. Because I happen to get a license from IRCA, I get a bigger platform than everybody else. So what the Broadcast Content Code requires, and what is fair, is that right that they've been given be used in a balanced way to afford, especially at election time, the parties each party a reasonable and fair opportunity to make their case to the public.
Are there penalties in place for people who breach the code of practice?
Yeah, the breach of the code, a breach of the code, well, there's a range or a graduated range of actions that IRCA would take. It generally starts with making you fix the breach if you can, but eventually it does get to the point of potential financial penalties, or revocation or suspension of the license itself.
Let's touch quickly on the Broadcast Act. The Broadcasting Act was the original legislation that governed broadcasting in the country, more specifically the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. Does the Act still apply to broadcasters, or is it just IRCA's code of practice now that supersedes whatever was in the legislation?
Yeah. The Broadcasting Act was repealed by the Communications Act, which empowered IRCA as the regulator. So it has been completely superseded and is no longer in force. So the only regulation that covers, other than obviously the law of the land in a general sense, that covers broadcasting is IRCA's regulation, and therefore the code of practice is the regulation, is the regulatory instrument.
We're talking to Stephen Burrell, the CEO of IRCA. We'll continue our conversation in just a moment.
Come home to Fidelity Bank for the lowest payments on loans and consolidations ever. Find out how you can get lower interest rates, lower fees, and lower monthly payments. And with 30-day no pay and a built-in savings plan, Fidelity is giving you just what you need to bounce back with money left in your pocket. Plus, free financial coaching with expert advice on how to keep more cash in your wallet. A $500 value free. Take advantage of low rates.
He made so many promises.
We in the PLP, we have big plans to fight crime.
And we've suffered through all their broken promises.
Big plans to reinvent education and training.
And 5 years of their empty rhetoric.
Big plans to expand the Bahamian economy.
The PLP has ruined our economy by serving themselves at our expense. Can Bahamians really afford 5 more years of Perry Christie's big plans?
Big plans.
Since 1967, Focal has been a vital part of the Grand Bahama community, providing high-quality products and great customer service. Today, we continue to work hard and remain focused on fueling growth for people throughout the Bahamas.
What's going on, boy? Son ain't stop at Chelsea.
Boy, just saw a number out. I got a number for this, got a number for that, and more numbers coming. I was just saying I want to switch my mobile provider, but that could be another new number.
No, boy, you on here? IRCA introduced MNP.
MNP? What's that?
MNP, Mobile Number Portability. See, with MNP, you could switch service providers while keeping your existing number. It's so easy.
Sounds good to me.
MNP, change your service, keep your number.
Welcome back to You and Your Money. I'm Carlton Smith. We're talking to Stephen Barreau, and we're discussing the responsibilities of the Utilities Regulation and Competition Authority. We're talking about the election season, and there's an area in communications that seem to be unregulated for the most part. The World Wide Web, social media, WhatsApp, all of these different platforms seem to be, people are engaging in either news information or some sort of communication in that environment. Does IRCA have responsibility for trying to regulate cyberspace communication?
IRCA does not regulate cyberspace communication. Do we have a responsibility for it? It is, I imagine, technically possible within, you could probably fit it within our mandate. But one of the critical issues about regulating things that happen on the internet is that you would first have to find the internet. Not much of what you see on social media, much of what you see on the internet is not actually based or hosted in the Bahamas. So, in order to effectively regulate the internet, you would have to do one of two things. The approach taken in some countries, China is a very good example, some of the Middle Eastern countries, is that they block certain sites so that you can only have social media sites that are hosted within those countries. That's a very expensive, very draconian, very, it's the kind of approach which you can only take in countries of that type with very few freedoms. The other option is to somehow monitor all of the content and try to reach out to these international organizations to get them to take things down. The effort one would have to put in to doing that, and the resources and the cost of it, would be astronomical.
What about the licensees of IRCA though? The licensees, if I'm a licensee of IRCA, I have a Facebook page as well as a website and some other social media platform. Do I have the responsibility to ensure that the content posted on those sites comply with the code of content practice of IRCA?
If you have a Facebook page, if you are posting it, it is possible that you may be caught, because it depends, are you an audiovisual media provider in the Bahamas?
Right.
And it is possible. Right. I say that very guardedly because the complications of who's posting, where are you posting. You have a Facebook presence, but you don't own that presence. So who is posting on it? It's not yours, it's Facebook's. I mean, you're operating on a Facebook space.
Right.
So again, it would be a very complicated thing, and it's not one that we have sought as IRCA to extend our jurisdiction into, because we could not extend it in a balanced and sensible way. There's also the need to have I guess the bigger conversation as a country, as from a policy perspective, as to what we regulate and why we regulate. It's easy for IRCA to say, well, we gave you some airwaves to broadcast on. You broadcast in this country on those airwaves. We'll control, or we will have some say in what you say. It becomes more and more difficult once you get into the internet space to justify the level of regulation that we impose.
Now, as we work through the electoral season in our country, are you monitoring what's happening with the various media houses to ensure that they are in compliance with the code?
Outside of the electoral season, we generally carry out, or we undertake a complaint-based process. So if people complain, we address it. We don't seek to impose otherwise. During the election season, the election period as we call it, we heighten our monitoring a bit, so that we do listen out and look out for things that may be a problem. But we do not, and at this stage, we do not, although we expect to potentially do it on polling day, we do not listen to everything that is said on all of the airwaves. There are 20-something radio stations in New Providence alone. If we were to hire that many people to do that task, it would be a challenge. And then on top of that, you then have to be able to discern between what you've said. In most cases, the best person to judge a statement is the person who has a problem with it. There's an argument that's often made about, well, why are you regulating if nobody has a challenge? Now, we don't take that approach. There are things that everybody might like, but are not in the best interest of the country. Well, not everybody, but a large number of people may like something, but it doesn't make it right. But we do take the approach that a complaint is the best way to hone in on those things, or rather it's the most efficient way to hone in on those things that are a problem. So we always, and this is why, I'll say it here again, we beg people almost to complain to us when they hear something or see something they don't like. And normally we require you to complain to the station first and then come to IRCA, give the station an opportunity to fix it. But the elections are only not even 2 weeks away now. I think are we into 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks away. If we wait for you to give the station a month, obviously that does not work.
Right.
So during this period, we would say that, if there are things that are happening that need addressing, reach out to IRCA. Because we do need to know, and we need to be in a position to act sooner rather than later.
Now, the final thing I need you to address before we end the show tonight is this issue about debt and the number portability process. If I owe a service provider and I'm trying to move to another service provider, is there any provision for the debt to be paid off before I am able to move?
Right. So you can avail yourself of mobile number portability, provided that you have a mobile phone service that is able to make and receive calls and text messages. So you can owe your existing provider. You don't have to pay off everything you owe before you go, assuming you're a postpaid customer, obviously, because prepaid customers don't have debt. You can owe your provider, but it can't be so much that they have decided to put your system one way or block your system or suspend service. As long as you can make a call, as long as you can send that text message that you have to send from your device, from your existing service, you can port. Now, you have a contractual responsibility to pay your service provider, and that responsibility continues even after the service has been closed off and you've ported your number out. And bear in mind, this is a country with only 2 providers. You may have to go back to that provider one day, and you don't want to leave something behind that's going to prevent that. But so there are a couple, caveats are, one is your phone has to be unlocked to use it with another provider's service. So bear in mind that locking may be an issue. If you owe money, you can move as long as you can still send text messages and make calls. And the third one is you lose anything that was with your previous provider in terms of credit. So for prepaid customers especially, don't go, if you topped up your phone yesterday with $30 and you go port now, that $30 is gone as soon as the port goes through. So bear that in mind and make sure that you take account of that as you move forward.
Okay, Stephen Burrow, thank you so much for being a part of You and Your Money tonight. Certainly a pleasure having you. I'm sure you're going to be back. We're going to have some more conversations about IRCA and its role in regulating these sectors of our society.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That does it for this edition of You and Your Money. For the entire TCL group, I'm Carlton Smith.
You and Your Money was brought to you by IRCA, Fidelity, the Free National Movement, Focall, and Polymers.